Hi guys, welcome to the video and welcome once again to Flight Simulator 2020. Now what we're going to look at in this video is the validity of the simulator as a visual navigation tool. What do I mean by that? Well, prior to Microsoft 2020, all the base sims, and it's important here I'm talking about basic sims, they were okay with instrument flight because they had all the beacons, you could fly the airways, etc. But the land detail, the ground detail, wasn't good enough to fly VFR, so you couldn't really have an accuracy or a fidelity that was good enough that if you were doing a PPL or a CPL, you could practice a route, you know, the night before. Now with visual navigation there's two elements here. One is the higher altitudes and one is the lower altitudes, and I'll explain the significance. We've had ortho for a while as ortho scenery, either as True Earth in FSX P3D, which is a payware product, or as ortho, which is handmade but free by the user. Essentially what you do is you have Bing Maps or Google Maps and you translate that into geotiles that you can drape over a mesh to have a realistic interpretation of the world. Now both of those are a form of satellite and or aerial photography mapping, which form a texture or if you like a carpet or a blanket that is draped over a mesh. It doesn't really matter which one of the two you look at, they both fundamentally do the same thing. Yes, there are finer details between them and how they're implemented, and for example, True Earth, there's a lot of stuff where Orbex have touched things up. They've added certain landmarks, for example, and whatnot, and both of them are very good in their own right for different reasons. But one of the key things I wanted to have a look at here is this is an out-of-the-box sim that uses Bing Maps, and there's two very significant things in terms of visual flying. One is what I describe as medium to high altitude VFR, so we're not talking 14,000 feet, 15,000 feet or above, we're talking 6,000 to 8,000 feet, something like that. And then the other one is low level, and you might ask, well, what's the significant difference? Well, the thing is, if you're at 6,000 or 7,000 or 8,000 feet, when you're looking at the world, you're predominantly looking down, and it looks like the carpet and the map from Bing Maps or Google Maps or Google Earth or whatever you want to call it. And actually, the route we're going to do goes below 1,500 feet AGL, so it's 1,500 feet above mean sea level, but there's going to be peaks in this, or areas in this, where we're going to be much lower than 1,500 feet from the terrain. Now obviously it's not planned as a real genuine flight you would do, it's just something that we're going to do in terms of today, but as I say, this route is going to be much lower level. Now why is that significant? Well, things like ridge lines all of a sudden cause a problem, because for example you might be flying towards a ridge and your turn point might be a lake. Now there's two issues you have here. First of all, lakes are flat and therefore don't always stand out as clearly when you're at 1,500 feet as they do say at 6,000. At 6,000 or 5,000 for example, you can see down, you can see the lake, you can see the shape, you can see the orientation, you can go, yeah, that's my lake, boom, nailed it. When you're at 1,500 feet, you can't always see the shape, the size, the orientation. And even worse than that, if it's the far side of a ridge line, you might not even see it until you've missed it or you're on top of it. So at lower levels, you've got additional elements here now all of a sudden. The topography makes it different to what you can see, how far you can see it. And so this Bing map that you might have draped over a mesh all of a sudden becomes something completely different when you're looking at it, if you like, across the plane as opposed to from above. So what we're going to do is have a look at a sim and see what the experience is. Now this is potentially something that's quite difficult to, I suppose, to measure. So all we're going to do really is get an impression of how useful it is as a tool. And of course, in terms of usability as a tool, if it's good enough, then potentially someone who's doing their PPL, or they're a PPL pilot in real world, or they're doing their CPL, their visual portion of their commercial pilot's license, this potentially becomes a very good revision or usable tool for pre-flying a route or pre-planning and then flying a route and getting an impression as to what you can see and what you can't see. And I've had it where I've been flying at low level, particularly in the military, where you mark something on a chart, you think, yeah, that should be quite easy to find, and then you go absolutely whacking past it because you can't see it. So what I'm first of all going to point out is that there is no valid VFR planning in the world map. There's none. I'll just click into it and show you. Your options are departure airport, select an arrival airport, and then these are your options down here in terms. Actually, I'll have to put the route in. So it's EGTE, which is Exeter, to EGDR, which should be Yeovilton, Culdrose. And your options for VFR navigation are straight line direct GPS, you can't interact with the lines, so you can't actually do any planning, and VOR to VOR, which there are no real usable VORs. That I hate how big these labels are. There is a VOR up here, which is by St Morgan, so that's the St Morgan VOR, but really that's got nothing to do with what we're trying to achieve here. So what I've got now, I've plotted out a short route. I'm going to fly it in the DA40, and it's going to basically be a very straightforward nav route for us. Now, there's a couple of things that you can do in terms of plotting routes with VFR scenery. You can either use something free like SkyVector, but even though this is the World VFR chart, it's not particularly detailed. So this is Exeter Airport, going to Oakhampton, which is a little town just to the north of this danger area. This is the Dartmoor danger area for ranges and army military manoeuvres, whatever. There's a reservoir here. We're going to come down by Bodmin Airfield, which is about here somewhere, and we're going to go past that to a small lake basically that's there. Going to continue down to Falmouth, then we're going to go to this area here. Now this area is going to be interesting, and I'll explain why on one of the next charts, and then we're going to go into Culdrose. Now obviously what I'm going to do is edit the route, because that's going to take me probably about an hour or so, something like that. And obviously that's an awful lot of time when actually all we're interested in is specific points. So this is a real-world flight planning tool. This is called SkyDemon, and it's something that real-world pilots would potentially use for GA, for route planning, etc. And you can see it's got major features on it. So it's more detailed than SkyVector, and actually you can go into quite a very high level of zoom. This is the Princetown mast. This is a very high mast. It's very easily visible from quite a high distance away. So it's on the top of Dartmoor. You can see here the Dartmoor danger area and ranges, and this is Princetown mast. So you never know, we might be able to have a look and see if we can see that. But as you can see, this has got a bit more detail to it, so you can see the route a bit clearer now. Is Exeter, Oakhampton to the Rodford Reservoir, over the top of well, I've always pronounced it Launceston, but I've heard recently it's pronounced Lanson. But there we are. Over to Colliford Reservoir. Then we're going to go past Bodmin, and there is Bodmin Aerodrome on the right. Now this is a hilltop aerodrome. It's quite difficult to see in real life, so it's one of those things where it's all grass and it's on a grassy hill. So it's quite challenging to see. We'll see if we can see that as we come down. Past St Austell. Falmouth is going to be a turning point. Falmouth is interesting because Falmouth is in a valley, so there's high ground to either side of it, and actually you drive down quite a steep hill to get into Falmouth. But it's very beautiful, very nice part of the world. But we're going to see what the representation is there in terms of the vertical aspect, and also obviously the built-up area. And then we're going to go down to here. This is going to be something that's going to be an interesting test for it. This is Goonhilly, or Goonhilly Downs. And it's an Earth station, so it's known as Goonhilly Downs Earth Station, which is why it's got this strange red marking. It's called a HERTA. It's an area of high-intensity radio transmissions. And when you see it in real life, it's got massive, great big satellite dishes. And basically, it is exactly what it says on the tin. These satellite dishes have high-intensity radiation from them. But this is an area you wouldn't normally go in. If you needed to go to Prydanig or Culdrose, you would generally try and avoid this area. But one of the nice things about this system is you can see it's giving you your vertical navigation with regards to terrain and aerials, etc. And actually, even if you hover over it, you can see it comes up with an antenna. So what I'm actually going to be using is this, and this is a UK CAA half-mil civilian chart of the south of England. It's out of date. It's a good 10 years out of date probably, but you can see that it's basically the same route. I'm going to follow the same route down here And what we'll do as we go along is I've got slightly enlarged pictures of these various areas, but one of the things you can now see is if I zoom in a little bit to one of them, you can see we've got things like small wooded areas, you've got better terrain elevation, you can see Falmouth down here, etc. So you can see I've just put very rough grease mark pencils on this just to indicate where we're going in the turning points. Little error up here actually on my part. I always draw circles round the turning points because the last thing you want is a whacking great big grease mark pencil if it's a relatively small and difficult to determine turning point. So here, for example, I've made a slight error, shouldn't have drawn into that, but that's one of the things that I've always done historically. The other map I'm going to use is, this is a quarter mil. This is actually a military one this has got to be 30 years old odd, something like that. No, 25 years old odd. So it's safe to say it's out of date, but this is something I used when I was doing my training as an observer down in Cornwall, and Cold Rose is down here. So although it's not on this picture, you can see exactly the same route. So what we can do before we get airborne, it's always worth seeing what you can do on the ground, because once you get airborne it gets busier. We can set our initial heading to 275, set our initial altitude to 15,000, which we've got. We can do a gross error check and make sure that the pressure setting looks okay, because the altitude, or the elevation I should say, of the airfield is 108 feet, 106 feet, 108 feet, something like that. So yeah, and the magenta's pointing in roughly the right direction for where we're going. So without further ado, we can get ourselves airborne. Fake squeaky brake sound, predominant in many of the aircraft. Excessive yaw to the left from the prop, and cannot remember what the VX, VY or rotate speed are in this aircraft, so we'll just hold it on the ground a little and then let it fly off. That's probably going to be the best. It'll tell us when it wants to get off. Taking a while to accelerate, as seems to be the case with FS2020, and it feels like it's just about ready to fly now. And there we go. Well within the white arc speed, so we can leave flaps down for a little bit. We can trim using the absolutely appalling trim system in this thing. Oh, I hate it because it just bounces. It's a shame because it ruins what's otherwise a lovely aircraft. We'll plug in the autopilot. I said we'll plug in the autopilot. We're looking for wing level and pitch hold, which we've got, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go down here, we're going to go to heading, and we'll put flight level change in as well. It might dip down whilst it just captures the correct speed. A lovely view of Exeter as we come over. And the first big pet hate is this wing wobble. Just bring the flaps up. This wing wobble is wildly unrealistic. We've got a 5-knot wind today, and looking at that you'd think we're in a hurricane. I'm not sure if it's something to do with the turbulence modelling, which I suspect because you can't turn turbulence off, or potentially something to do with excessive control response to turbulence. But either way, it's a load of nonsense, it's a load of garbage. Really not happy, which is a shame because this is one of the nicer aircraft to fly. Okay, let's just bring over the maps while we're climbing. In fact, we've got 400 to go, so we'll hang fire on that. And once we've finished climbing, we'll accelerate to 110. See, it does this with the stupid flight dynamics, and then yet it does a lovely effect of the optical impact through the polystyrene, or the polycarbonate here I should say. Exeter in all its glory. One of the guys I joined up with, he went to university in Exeter. Very nice university apparently. Please excuse the phone, ba-da-ding, just coming up to 1550 feet to go. And it's levelling so we can start to reduce the power. And we'll call that level, so we'll just watch the speed. It's got a little bit of a reduction going on at the moment. Okay, First thing I'm going to mention is elevation. Now, we said at the very start of this, one of the key factors is going to be elevation, in terms of elevation of the terrain and its impact on our visibility. Not visibility in terms of cloud, but visibility in terms of if you have a ridge line between you and, say, a road or a river. So here's our ridge line wobbling around. There could be a road or river the other side of it that we were planning to use as a navigation marker, and now we can't, because it's the other side of the road, of the ridge. So one of the benefits really of being able to see what the low level appearance is like is that you go, oh, I was hoping to use that. And particularly if you're a PPL and you're less confident in your navigation techniques. The problem with this is if it isn't entirely accurate, then it can be counterproductive. So if this isn't accurate in terms of this wood being here, you go and practice your route, and then you'd go, oh, you know, I'm expecting to see a large wood on my left. Oh, hang on, where's the wood? And obviously that can become counterproductive. So one of the things we have to gauge here is the limitations as to what is or isn't going to help us in terms of using it as a tool. And I say tool in the loosest possible sense, because fundamentally that's what it is. Now we can do an early gross error check in that we're expecting to go north about Dartmoor, and so Dartmoor is an area of high land, and we've got it dropping away to an area of low land. So this, although it's very faint at the moment, this is looking promising for a gross error check that we're heading in the right direction, because we haven't got that at distance anywhere else around there except there. Don't be fooled by that, that's the cloud base making that appear. There is high terrain over there by the looks of things. Yeah, in fact it's not, it's high terrain. But fundamentally what we're expecting is high terrain dropping away to low terrain, and that's it. Now we've got the road following us here, so we're following up nicely. So what we'll do is we'll get a bit closer to the turn point, and I will come back to you then. So as we toodle along, I'm just going to mention a couple of things in terms of map reading or using aeronautical charts for visual flight. I always used to get these the wrong way around, but basically one of them is chart to ground, the other one is ground to chart. So basically what that means is if you go map to ground or chart to ground, what you're looking at is you look at the map, you look at where you're expecting to be, you look at features that would confirm that you're there, and then you look out the window to see if those features are present. So basically what you do is you fly along your heading for, say, 6, 8, 12 minutes, whatever it might be, and you're expecting at 12 minutes to see a wood on your left and a lake on your right. And sort of, you know, a couple of minutes to go, you would go, right, I'm looking for the wood and the lake. You look up, you go, yeah, check, I've got a wood and a lake, or, ah, damn, I haven't got a wood and I haven't got a lake. So that is reading chart to ground or map to ground. The wrong way to do it, and I might actually have got this the wrong way round, ironically, but if I recall correctly, the wrong way to do it was to do it ground to chart. So in effect what you would end up doing is you'd look at the ground and you go, oh, you know, I can see a chimney there, so I'll look at the map and see if I can see a chimney anywhere on the map. All right, there we go, that's where I am. And what you can get into is a situation of confirmation bias. So what you then end up doing is you end up looking at the ground and trying to find a place on the map that you think it is representative of it. So that's one of the critical things, I guess, that becomes part of it. So as we're flying along, this is Dartmoor out to our left, and we're expecting, gross error check, to have Dartmoor on our left. And let's have a look at the map / chart and see what we're expecting to see. So let me get this up. Is that it? Yeah, here we go. So we're expecting to be coming down following the A30. We're expecting A30 on our left, river on our left with a T-junction in the river that splits Oakhampton, the town, into two, and a wooded section to the north. So that is a nice easy reference point for us to identify and to pick up on, and it will definitely confirm that we are where we are, because if you look around, there's nothing else like it. So it's a lovely feature. It also means that in doing so we're keeping north and clear of the danger area here. Back to our task in hand. We are looking for a town with the A30 on the left, a river on the left, and a large wooded area on the right. So we have squinting our magical zoom eyes, a town here, we've got a river here, and we've got a road here. And what we're looking for is for the town to have a river running north-south that splits it in two. Now, having a look here, we've got a lot of wooded vegetation, and this is where the limitation is going to come in that I can see. I've been down this road a lot of times, and I am not entirely sure that these woods are accurate. And if I look at the charts, let's have a look at the quarter mil. So here's the quarter mil, and you can see that there are no woods here. No woods on these parts at all. So this for me is where one of the areas to be very wary of is certainly not going up that valley like that. This is one of the areas to be wary, in my opinion, is that there can be things, they can't hand place trees etc. all over the world. So there's potentially going to be areas for my money that they don't quite get it right. So this area of trees here for me isn't right. Actually, let's just sit ourselves up. Town, A30, river running north-south, river running east-west as well, and we should have a wood to the north, which we do. So that's our turning point. Where are we turning to? Need me a chart over here. We're turning onto a heading of 263. So let's turn 263. And that's our next leg started. Start the watch. So, having a look on our map. Let's have a look on our quarter mil. Yeah, you see it's got the A30, it's got the town, it's got the wooded area to the north. We've just come over here, so we're pretty much on track. But as I say, there's no indication. This is a quarter mil map, so you would expect, you can see that even the smallest woods are sometimes represented on here, but what we see out to our left is quite large and quite noticeable, that I would expect that to be on a chart, but it's not. However, marvel in the beauty of Dartmoor. Okay, so now we can plod on our merry way, and what we're looking for next, our next turning point, let's get the half mil up. Our next turning point is Rodeford Lake, and it's kind of an oak leaf is the best way of describing it, I suppose. But one of the tests now we're looking at is the viability of the sim in terms of when you approach the lake, what it looks like in terms of choosing it as a turn point. Now obviously once you're over the top it should be absolutely clear, but this little black mark down here is because there's a dam. A very small dam, but a dam, so I don't know if that will be represented. And I've noticed that rivers are very fuzzy in appearance here, they're not crisp and clear. But again, it's the A30 on our left. Yeah, let's have a look, see what we find with Rodeford Lake. Again, we're reading the map and then we'll look out. We've got a lake, large wooded area that looks a bit like a kind of boot, I suppose, with a leg and main bit and toes out the front, but we've got this large wooded area that continues all the way up here. There's lots of woods to the north and far less to the south, and the A30 is our boundary. So we want dual carriageway, large oak leaf shaped lake, and woods to the north. Let's see what we can see. Okay, so here's our water. Now here's the issue, you can't really determine that that is the same shape. It is just about. We're looking for woods to the north. Check. But again, it's not entirely in keeping with the shape that we were expecting to see. Oh yeah, here we go. It's not a great representation, but you can see that's like the foot that we mentioned with the toes here, the heel here, and then the leg of the boot. So I'm happy that's where we're supposed to be and that we are on track. I'll just bring us left slightly to I hate that if you don't quite nail it properly. We should still have the A30 down there somewhere to our right. There it is. picture centre. And our next heading for our turn is 237. Here's our Oakleaf Lake, so that's come up nicely. We could see it as we approached. A little bit too much woods round here. Here we go, this is the quarter mill. So this is routing down to a separate reservoir, Bodmin here, and we're looking to pass over a town called Lanson, or for years I said it was Launceston, but I keep hearing on Pirate FM, the local radio station, that it's Lanson. Other radio stations are available down there, but one of the local radio stations calls it Lanson, so I've now adopted that. But we should be coming over a built-up area, Lanson. We should have a very large wood out to the left, and directly opposite it we should have a slightly smaller road, wood out to the right. Now this is kind of in a dip. If you look, it's got high ground all around it, so we'd expect it to be slightly depressed. And then straight ahead of us we've got a high ground area with a large amount of woods, and the reservoir is in there. So let's see what we can see. So back in the cockpit we can now have a quick look and see. Now this is one of the ones where we're looking for what you'd think is easy to see. It's a large reservoir, but it's not easy to see. We know we're in the right place because we've checked so far and we've had no issues. There's not many large buildings like that by roads in Cornwall. But the question now is it down in this depression down here? So we've got a depression with water left and right. Let's have a look at the map, see what the map is telling us. The map is, let's go for the quarter mill. So we're facing a large woodland, it's on a ridge line, there's a depression on the far side of the wood, which is a road running northwest southeast, small reservoir down to the south, unlikely to see due to the terrain being quite high here. And if you look at this, the elevation for this Bodmin Moor Lake is quite high, so there's a possibility we'll see it very, very late. So really the key factor here is the odd shaped wood before we get there. And that looks like the wood there. So that would indicate to me, there's the small lake, there's the big wood. Big wood runs out, we're on the right hand side, but there's also an even bigger wood. Look at that, running across there. Now this is a river, so it's not part of our anticipated lake. A30 running down the right again, but this looks like a promising large wood for us to go straight over the top of, and we will see if our fruits of our labours are correct. What on earth is that? Some large industrial estate, it reckons. But yeah, I'm not convinced that's big enough to be ours, plus the fact it has a river running through it. So as I say, we're expecting a large wood, go over it, and we're expecting a lake to be on the other side. So let's see. So join me again at the wonderful flight over the valley, flight over the crest where the wooded area is, and lo and behold, there's our lake that was masked by terrain. So let's just have a look at it in all of its glory. That's our huge lake. There's the wooded areas we've just flown over. Over a river, massive lake, and then from the lake we're heading 226. So here we are with another conundrum. We know that Falmouth is on the coast, and we know that it's on the south coast of Cornwall. But one of the things we want to do is we want to be able to identify it. There's lots of small towns. Falmouth's actually quite a big town for Cornwall, but there's lots of small towns, but there's also, more importantly, lots of bays and inlets, and it might be not till later that we can see our actual destination where we're aiming for. So what we can do is we can pop over to a map, or a chart I should say. Let's see what we get if we come here. Okay, so here's the civil half mill, and you can see that as we come over here there's a large bay that comes up. but more importantly, look at this river. This river kind of parallels us into the bay, and then there's another estuary that's directly to the northeast of Falmouth, and there's no large towns A here at all, but B with a river that's and an estuary that's immediately before them. So if we're coming down here, we would expect to see a significant river on our right, and it expands out into an estuary, and we would expect to see the town directly in front of us. Now, as I say, it's actually got a very steep hill as you drive down into Falmouth. It's quite a scenic part of the world, but what we're looking at is a large quantity of water as a kind of estuary, woods just to our right, river following it in, large mass of water as an estuary, and then on the opposite bank we've got Falmouth. And being the opposite bank, I would suggest that we're probably going to see it quite readily. We thought, looking at the map, that we would see Falmouth on the opposite bank of the water, and that it would be readily visible, because generally speaking the opposite bank of the waterway will be sort of almost facing you. If you imagine a V, the near side will drop away and the far side will be presented almost flat to you. So that is pretty much where we wanted Falmouth to be, and where we thought we would see it. Nice. So heading after here is 215220. So the next thing we're looking for is this bad boy here. This is Goonhilly Downs, and this is a collection of massive, I don't know if they're radio telescopes or communication dishes, but they're basically huge satellite dishes. You know, the sort you see on TV looking out to space for aliens, that kind of thing, which is why it's got this squared off area here. It's HRTA, high intensity radio transmission. So just out of interest, I got this up. This is Goonhilly Earth Station. So this is it. You can see it does deep space operations, all sorts of stuff. But it's got these massive dishes. I don't know how many it's got. Yeah, 1, 2, and then it's got some smaller ones. You can just see under the text there. So yeah, it's quite an iconic site locally. But if we pop outside, it's got this kind of industrial building set. That's clearly it, because you can see the road markings are all over the place. So you know, that's the kind of thing you'd expect to see on an industrial estate, a housing estate, something like that. But there's no representation of Goonhilly itself, which is quite interesting, or it is for me anyway. So how do we wrap this up? The point of this video is to see whether the sim was good enough that you could navigate with regards to visual features. So flight in the VFR environment. And as I say, previous sims hadn't really been good enough to do that. Bing Maps and Google Maps are theoretically good in terms of that top-down perspective, because obviously it's like your blanket laid out on top of a set of mesh. You know, you can look down, you can see down, and if you're at high enough altitude, that's what you'd see. You'd see exactly the same as Google Maps or Bing Maps sees. You'd see exactly the same thing. But what's happened is, as we've come low, we've managed to demonstrate a few things. We've managed to demonstrate that terrain can mask features that you might be using as navigation features. So we had the second reservoir where it didn't come in to immediate view, even though we were relatively close. We were within a few miles of it. It wasn't really apparent until we got closer to it. So it's one of those things where it's like selecting your turn points, or selecting the checkpoints that you're going to look for, checking your timings, for example. They're not always going to be immediately apparent, and that's potentially one of the useful bits of the sim, is that you could plot a route, you could fly the route and go, you know what, actually that huge lake, I'm not seeing it till literally I'm on top of it, which makes correcting for wind particularly rather challenging or rather difficult. The other temptation is that if you've taken longer to fly the lake, you might be looking out and going, oh, I'm really lost, there's no lake here, it's a big lake, I should be able to see it. So the terrain and the undulations and the elevation of things, obviously we've demonstrated that that can play a part in this. But what we've also demonstrated is how when it's correctly put on as a mesh, we can see that terrain can be beneficial for navigation, in terms of navigation with regards to the terrain. So when we came past Dartmoor, we had our gross area check, first of all, that we had Dartmoor, high ground on the left, low ground on the right, and a dip down. And as we got to Dartmoor, we could see that we had the road, the river, and the high ground, and then the wood onto the right. So, you know, it became very clear and very usable as a navigation feature. So check, those two things are really beneficial learning points. So using elevation to both use as a positive thing, so checking your location, etc., but also the negatives of sometimes it can be masking things that on a flat 2D map look, you know, as a massive reservoir. Why can't I see it? Unless you look at the terrain as well, it's not always obvious that you aren't going to be able to see it at low level. So that's a couple of things out of it. So the next thing we saw was object placement, in terms of potentially incorrect object placement. And the example I would use is when we crossed north about Dartmoor. On the left hand side we saw an awful lot of trees and forestry. Now I don't know anything about programming, and I don't know anything about the logic behind how the system sets out, going, you know, I want to put trees here, I want to put buildings here, this type of building goes here, this type of tree goes here. The algorithm, or whatever mechanism it is that they're putting in place to determine where the trees are placed, for me it's not reliable enough that I would say that, well, if the sim says the trees are supposed to be there, they must be there in real life. So in effect what we've got to be careful is going the right way. And by the right way, I mean what we would be doing is we'd be going, right, here's a real life chart. Here's what I would expect to see as a result of a real life chart. Look out the window. Do I see the features I'm looking for? Ignore the features you're not looking for. Do I see the features I'm looking for? Do I see, for example, a town split by a river with a main road to the left, a further part of the river to the left, high ground to the left, and wooded area to the right? Yes, check, know where I am. As opposed to, oh, there's a ton of trees on that hillside. Have a look at the map. Where's a hillside with a ton of trees? And this is one of the things potentially where there's a gotcha. So the overall thing for me is that if you were doing it map to ground, i.e. you're reading the map, you're navigating using a map, and then you're checking that navigation with what you find on the ground, the chances are it's going to be accurate. If you do it the other way and look at what's on the ground out of the cockpit and then try and find it on the map, it may not be there. The final bit is that features that, even if they're local knowledge and they're significant in stature, for example, Goonhilly Earth Downs it's not, I wouldn't say it's well known, but it's a very distinct feature. There's not many of them around, particularly in the UK. So things like that I would have hoped to have been there. And this is where it comes down to the fact that it's not hand-placed obstacles, so hand-placed objects. You saw that it looked like just a commercial industrial estate, whereas in reality it's nothing like that. So in summary, is it a useful tool? I think yes. Generally yes, but I think the caveats are that you have to remember it's a sim and therefore it's not real world, and it would be easy to be drawn into making assumptions about it that it just can't stand up to. So I hope you found the video useful, guys. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please don't forget to tick like, share or subscribe, and I'll speak to you in the next one. Take care.